Good afternoon and most welcome to 923 of the series. I will today address a great problem within the understanding of Derridian philosophy or deconstruction. And it's so eloquently formulated by the Luxembourgian/American author, philosopher, educator Rolf Gachet. And one very common understanding of Derrida, both from his followers and his critics, is that he is anti-systemic. And I have never thought anything of the sort, because my favorite former transductor of, still is to some point, Arkady Plotnitsky, meant he was actually showing us the path to a true science. Rudolf Gachet excels as usual. In the chapter A System Beyond Being, that actually says itself, pretty self-explanatory. One reads that on page 177, chapter 9, A System Beyond Being. And since I haven't read the chapter through and through, I will just give my good guess and see how my pre-understanding fits the text. And that is one very important thing I learned recently, and that is to more fully construct a pre-understanding before I enter any text. I used to just What I used to do is just open books without a pre-understanding, but especially since understanding the hermeneutical circle, as explained by Martin Heidegger in Sein und Zeit, I have come to looking even more into really getting a pre-understanding complete before I enter any text. Have a very decisive take on what it is about. Only then can we reach an understanding. Whereas we do the reading without a pretense, we will never be able to reach the text. There are actually two fractalities that need to sort of reach out to one another. Otherwise, understanding will not come, because understanding is a doing. And how do you do it? You do it by projection. You create a force, so to speak, towards the text, where you have a very clear idea of what it is about, the structure of it, and then you will be able to have this very important interactivity with the other fractality. And only then, at no other place, some understanding can come to fore. But without doing that, understanding will block itself out completely. And that will be leaving the hermeneutical circle, and it will also mean that you have a complete closeness, a direct reflectioning back without the circle. And this is, of course, the ego constructs the world, or as Gachet would call it, pure mirror reflection. Pure mirror reflection is something unthought of, something that cannot be thought. It's a blockage in thinking. and we give this black hole the name, and we call it grasping at reality or owning it. Well, anyway, page 177 at the start of the chapter. Infrastructures are the grounds by means of which deconstruction attempts to account for the contradictions and dissimilarities in, from a philosophical perspective and a philosophical standpoint, successful concepts and successful concept formation, argumentation, and the production of discursive totalities. The nature of the infrastructures can be further clarified by exploring the system, or rather the chains in which they are linked together, which open up in a deconstructed vista, form an irreducible space, in Platonic terms, epikeina tes ousia, beyond being. Traditionalists assume that when Plato refers to the idea to agathu, to that idea, all other ideas, that it is the objects of cognition and the knowledge itself what the sun is to all visible objects. He thinks of the good as the source of all possible knowledge. This source itself, not essence, but still transcends essence in dignity and surpassing power. It is something more exalted than being, ousia. It is the idea of all ideas, which thus becomes the ultimate source of being. Yet it's doubtful whether one can call it a form or idea in the first place. Furthermore, because of its fundamental indeterminacy, the agathon, as Heidegger has pointed out, cannot be hastily determined in ethico-metaphysical terms either. Derrida follows Heidegger's lead as well as his warning when, for instance, in Plato's Pharmacy, he demonstrates that the source of all being beyond being is generalized, or rather general. Writing, whose essential non-truth and non-presence is the fundamentally undecidable conditions of possibility and impossibility of presence in its identity and of identity in its presence. So to get rid of undecidables, we need presence, because only in presence can we have a sort of a stability and meaning. So we need to lock presence in this place, and by locking presence we get also a lock of the reader. Once the reader is locked, the text will be locked as well, and both are locked, and no motion no longer is possible. Everything will end up in a sort of nullification. This nullification means that there is no movement at all any longer. There is no difference. Everything has become too stable, unmovable, restful, you can call it. So the unmoving thing cannot present itself, it cannot give meaning. The differencing, or why not projection, is no longer possible as it was before. Let's continue. The source of being and beingness is, for Derrida, the system or chain beyond being of the various infrastructures or undecidables. Conversely, the idea of a general system is inseparable from this space, which is beyond the traditional oppositions of concepts and of the argumentative and discursive discrepancies to which deconstruction has made us sensitive. Yet the very claim that Derrida's philosophical efforts are not without systematical intentions needs immediate clarification, owing to the general assumption that his philosophy is anti-systemical. In order to come to grips with Derrida's thought, one must reject the temptation, because indeed it is a temptation, made by possible resources within the codified interpretive possibilities of philosophy itself, simply to determine it as anti-systematic. From its inception in Greek thought, philosophy has contained the two absolutely symmetrical alternatives of a systematic and non-systematic approach to truth, as proved in particular by the later renewal of anti-systematic thought in Hamann, the Romantics, Nietzsche and others. The aesthetic of the fragment presupposes the early determination of philosophy as episteme, and hence the systematic exposition and construction of systems. This anti-systematic fragmentary practice is in no sense radically subversive of the idea of science or of systemacity as characteristic of the philosophical enterprise. It is rather a genuine possibility within philosophy itself. And it carries out the systematic requirements of philosophy in its own way. We have already seen that Derrida's efforts to reach beyond of the classical opposition of logic and illogic do not lead him to abandon all rigor in argumentation. Neither does his critique of the idea of rigorous science, as the timeless telos of all genuine philosophy entail a mere renunciation of scientificity and systematic intentions. Given the complicity between pretensions to systematicity and the anti-systematic practices in philosophy, we must presume that Derrida's exploration of the infrastructures both continues the systematic telos of philosophy and attempts something entirely different, of which fragmentation gives at best a very oblique image. And this is this very common accusation against Derrida and of deconstruction as such, that it does imply this is very typical. You could call that the mirror image that sort of locks itself into place, and in the very striving for identity, it becomes almost like an obsession. It becomes too strong, and in the strengthening of the tendency, there is also a gesture that goes towards establishing a center. This center becomes more important than the whole, and this is of course the closure of awareness. Awareness is no longer as broad it was before. It does not take in the whole picture. So one can say that the mirror image analogy is in this case showing our tendency to cut out the mirror image and start looking for what's behind the mirror image only. And we are no longer able to have both the mirror image and what's looking into it. For me, that associates for me with the idea of perfecting something, polishing something. It has that tendency to make something stronger in the sense of more shiny, more exact, more original. And also there is the sequential order. First we look into the mirror, so that comes first. The very reflection, the reflection coming later, and it's not as original as what was once looking into the mirror. The mirror image is secondary. The first thing is what looks into it. And of course this is deconstruction, but it does not affect systemic thought. It can be systemic itself, and I would say to a great degree it would even be more perfected, better, because it takes in both sides, both what looks into the mirror and what comes back. And in some ways the thing not seen in the mirror image, because the only thing we see is the mirror image. We sort of derive the thing looking into the mirror from the mirror image. So there is a reversal that is possible. And I think this reminds me actually quite a bit about this reciprocal, when we spoke about friends. There is a reciprocal tendency, but there is also a reversal tendency. So while we say what is first is the thing looking in to the mirror, something we cannot see, which may make the whole thing a bit odd, a bit off in some sense, we still pertain to say that the thing that looked in is the better, the unseen part, but is still derived in some ways from the mirror image. So we take away all sort of change that the mirror can cause, all distortion. All mirrors cause distortion, and there's this certain grayness to the image that is coming from the tane, and we start perceivably look for that, and we look for the presence that's lost in the mirror image. The mirror image is secondary, so there is no longer a presence in the mirror image. The presence is before, and this is a very strict before, and all of a sudden we can start to look like Plato around the world and think that the origin is somewhere else. You see what this is where this is going. It's an excellent way into understanding why we have this lure and how it actually comes from experience itself. Experience is not that self-explanatory. It doesn't explain itself as we normally think. We normally think that reality as it is, we just look at it. But closer inspection shows that it is not that simple at all. And this is knowing, this is daring to get into more complexities. This is daring to question what we seem to, what we usually, to us usually seem to be self-evident. So self-evident we don't even have the possibility of questioning it. But this is what Gachet shows. The reflective idea is something that can be questioned, or rather open up. It's not questioning in that sense that is arguing against it or arguing for it, Rather, what is happening is that we're opening up some things in space and time that has been closed off for inspection, and that's quite enough. We need not to do anything more, just look at it. And once we start looking at it, it cannot be undone. We have literally got into an area that has not been entered before, and that in itself makes it visible, it makes it lively, it makes it accessible to our thinking, and everything becomes broader. And this is this broadening of awareness. And I think there is a parallel here in between broadening of awareness and broadening or deepening of knowledge. They are not completely dissimilar. There are distinct, typical associations here that sort of link them. There are also differences, but in this case it's most interesting to see how the mirror can be taken in different ways, and that's probably the most important. Once we be able to sort of juggle the perception, once that juggling is possible, once it's possible to enter, we get our freedom back. And this is the opening up of a truly ontological change. Because without an ontological change, we will be stuck in the ontic mode. And this is probably the name why it's called a system beyond being, already formulated by Plato. I will jump a paragraph here and continue to conclude. This is the last paragraph in page 178. Let us first briefly examine the ways in which Derrida assumes certain systematic intentions without, however, yielding to the intra-philosophical determinations of the fragment. Take, for instance, the beginning of positions, where Derrida refers to a certain system, somewhere open to an undecidable resource that sets the system into motion, end of quote, and determines it to be an integration of the order of reasons that traditionally informs systematic enterprises. Yet at the same time, he admits his reluctance, quote, for obvious reasons, to call the text of that system fragmentary. Pages 3 to 4 of Positions. See also S 124 and 134. Among the numerous instances of the concept of the system in the text of Derrida, with or without quotation marks, I shall mention only the following passage from the essay Difference, where he speaks of the infrastructures as a system, quote, which is no longer that of presence but of difference, unquote, or as a system, quote, of ciphers that is not dominated by the truth value, which in this manner becomes an included, inscribed and circumscribed function. Truth values here refers to having some outer reference. That could be called representation, could be correspondence to an outer X. And this outer X is oddly incredibly similar to what looks into the mirror before the mirror image. That cannot be seen that cannot be observed, that cannot be felt. It can, on good grounds, be assumed though, but that's not the same thing. In some ways they are absolutely not equal. There is an underlying difference, and that difference is very important. It's not only a difference in quality, they do completely different things. The thing looking into the mirror is completely unseen, can only be seen indirectly by with what is reflected. So the thing looking into the mirror and what's reflected is never the same thing. And once you get this far, things becomes very self-evident. And this is also the phrase episteme or epistemology. Is the science of what is the thing that looks into the mirror, the originating force, the more truer reality, if you like, or the pre-reality that constructs what you see. And of course in Plato's eyes that is an illusion. That's the world of the senses, of lower quality than the thing looking into the mirror. It's just brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. One never ceases to be surprised by Rolf Gachet. He is incredibly sharp when it comes to his pedagogical sense to explain things from many different angles, and in the end you come to grips with something that could be the most difficult part of philosophy as such, but it also goes beyond philosophy, goes to a point where it includes all of human endeavors, and it doesn't see limits either, because all of human endeavor, all of human world, all of existence of ontology is the mirror image plus the thing looking in. Different as they are both constructs complementary of what is ontological. And now our big journey begins in investigating what do we have and why is it there, which is the most important question. A little bit like, why did someone look into the mirror? What was the intention? And now we open up that. I say thank you very much, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye.